Welcome everybody to our Penn AI Tech webinar. Penn AI Tech is the Penn Artificial Intelligence and Technology Collaboratory for Healthy Aging, an initiative funded by the National Institute on Aging. Today, we're very excited to have with us as our speaker, Professor Sophie Scott, who is the Director of the Cognitive Neuroscience at the University College in London. And Dr. Scott uses brain imaging to ask questions about how speech is processed as a sound, the neural basis of speech and sound processing, and the social roles of vocalizations. Professor Scott became the director of the ICN in 2019 and gave the Royal Society Christmas lectures in 2017. She has been working with brains since the mid-90s, and her first book is called The Brain: 10 Things You Need to Know. We're very excited and happy to have her, especially from the other side of the Atlantic, joining us at a later time for her. I want to remind our attendees that if you have questions or comments, please use the Q&A feature on your Zoom. And upon completion of the talk, we'll get a chance to maybe address some of the questions or all of the questions, depending on how much time we have. So again, Professor Scott, thank you so much. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this extremely kind invitation. I'm just trying to share my screen, and here we go. There we go, brilliant. So I'm going to be talking about laughter, the evolution, the neurobiology of laughter, and really trying to sort of map out even that you can discuss laughter as in a scientific way, because there's not a great deal of that sort of scientific research into laughter. And I just want to start with some examples of laughter. So this is a French television program that broadcast a few years ago, in which people were sharing a lot on social media over the past couple of years. The television program is called C'est mon choix, it's my choice. And this particular episode is called Mon rire ne passe pas inaperçu. My laughter does not pass unnoticed. And well, this is what it sounds like. Ah oui, ma voiture.
Vous êtes célibataire, c'est pas à cause de votre rire?
J'espère pas.
Non.
So I think that's fair. I think that laughter probably doesn't pass unnoticed. Now, those are obviously extreme forms of laughter, but laughter is a very strange sound. It sounds a lot more like an animal call than it sounds like speech, and it's an example of a non-verbal emotional vocalization, but it's one that can take us into quite strange places. And I think that's part of the reason why people haven't studied laughter very much. I think also sometimes it feels like a really trivial and sort of silly thing to study, and if there's one thing I can try to convince you of today, it's that actually, no, it's a really important thing that we should study. And I think it's very interesting if you go back to the first study of sort of humans and the recognition and expression of emotions, which was the book written by Charles Darwin back in 1872. He was interested in how some emotions, not all emotions, but how some emotions might have an older evolutionary history, and that he came to emotions through thinking about evolution. And he was interested in how an emotion like fear or anger might be such a useful emotion that you find it sort of conserved in evolution, and therefore humans might share emotional expressions and recognition of emotions with animals like dogs or other apes because of this kind of shared evolutionary value. And a lot of the emotions that Darwin talked about in his book, fear, anger, disgust, happiness, we carried on studying for the next 150 years, going on 200 years. But one we didn't, and that's laughter. So Darwin thought laughter was an expression of joy, and he wrote about it a lot. He used to take himself along to London Zoo and get the zookeepers to tickle baboons for him, and then it's a beautiful description of an animal's eyes brightening when it's tickled. And he thought it was very important. He thought joy was a very meaningful emotion, and somehow it just fell off the radar. We stopped paying a lot of attention to it, and more recently, at the turn of the millennium, an American scientist called Barbara Fredrickson was arguing that we should pay a lot more attention to positive expressions of emotion, positive experiences. And that has led to more interest in laughter. I think people have started to take positive things more seriously. You're probably wondering, what would laughter look like in another animal? I've just got a quick example here. So this is Robin Williams, the late American comedian, when he met Coco, the signing gorilla. She was an American who could sign American Sign Language, sorry, American gorilla who could sign American Sign Language. And when he met her, she signs to him tickle, and he tries to tickle her, and it's difficult. So at first, it's not working. She's not laughing. But look at what happens when the tickling is successful. You have to really get in there with a gorilla. They've got thick skin. And what happens when he actually manages to tickle her? Look at how her facial expressions, look at her movements. So you're starting to see something a lot more familiar here. Now, interestingly, in that situation, you can't hear the sound that she's making because the laughter that other apes produce, and of course we are apes, is very gentle. It's almost like a gentle grunting sound, kind of sound. But we're not it's not only apes that laugh. So a laugh-like vocalization, and I mean laughter in terms of how it's found, which behaviors are associated with it, has been described also in rats. And this is work by the American scientist Jan Panksepp. And he was looking at rat vocalizations and noticed that rats made a very specific vocalizations when they were playing with one another. And rats are very social, and they play with each other, and they make a distinct vocalization when they're playing. They also make that same vocalization when they're tickled. And here, this rat is making the sound when it's being tickled. And then when the scientist stops tickling it, the rat is making the sound to try and elicit more tickling from the human. And Panksepp thought that laughter, when you find it more generally across animals, functions as an invitation to play. So we've got Darwin associating it with joy, and for Panksepp, it's an invitation to play. And of course, play is very, very important to mammals. All mammals play when they're juveniles, and many mammals, like humans and rats and otters, play their whole lives. Play is inherently an ambiguous behavior. It's defined by the fact that it's kind of like a pointless fun activity, and you need to show that you're being playful. You need to show that you're being intentionally playful. And animals use different ways of expressing this. So there's something called the play face, which is a loose, open, very unthreatening mouth. The dogs are all doing it here. In fact, play is so important to dogs. They have when dogs do what the dog here, the top left is doing, when they bow down with their feet in front of them, that's called the play bow, and it means everything after this is a game, we're playing. And when there's a noise associated with this, it is laughter. And that's across mammals. So it seems that laughter has this very central role for perhaps in joy, definitely in play. And of course, those aren't necessarily two different things. We didn't know very much about how much more laughter could be out there. All mammals play, but nobody was looking for what noises they might make. And so an American scientist called Greg Bryant set out to look at play vocalizations that might turn out to be a form of laughter across different animals. And he found, in fact, across a wide range of mammals, including really unlikely mammals like cows and weasels, you get distinct play vocalizations. And in fact, this was not limited to mammals. So there's a sort of a New Zealand parrot called a kea, which is very social. They're quite naughty. If you visit South New Zealand, they're quite likely to come up and start eating your trainers while making eye contact with you. And they play a lot together. And when they play, they have a distinct vocalization. So it may not be, it may be something to do with, you know, social animals that play rather than something that's specifically about mammals. So I got interested in laughter, not because I was interested in, and I never set out to study laughter. I was working on the neurobiology of human voices and how we express ourselves with the voices. And I started looking at the expression of emotion in voices and looking at these non-verbal emotional vocalizations, things like screams and laughs and disgusted sounds. And there's not much work on those. There's a great deal of studying how we express emotions with our faces, and much less with these sorts of non-verbal emotional expressions. And my PhD student, Disa Sota, was doing studies in the UK and in northern Namibia with members of the Himba community to look at aspects of the recognition of vocal expressions of emotion across these two very different communities, to try and see if there's some kind of indication of a potentially some shared universality. Some emotions have been shown to be recognized cross-culturally, facially: fear, anger, disgust, sadness, happiness. They are recognized wherever you go in the world. Now, they might be complexities to that, but they have the same basic meaning. And this is not all emotions as well. It's just a handful of emotions that have this characteristic. And people have argued that the voice doesn't work this way. Vocal expressions of emotion, people have said, are just too variable. They don't have this possibility for being sort of some universality in how they're expressed. So Disa and I were trying to test this. So Disa did several trips out to northern Namibia, driving for days with a translator to find Himba communities to work with. And she's interested in whether or not the Himba recognise non-verbal expressions of emotion recorded back in London, and vice versa. Can Londoners recognise non-verbal expressions of emotion recorded out in the Namibian desert? I've got the example of an expression here, so I want you to listen to this and see if you can work out what emotion this man's expressing. Now, you get absolutely no points for spotting that at the end there he started laughing. And in fact, if you listen carefully, other people are laughing as well. People are laughing at him for doing this silly thing. What emotion was he expressing before then? Sorry, I'm just going to cough. He was expressing something. Does it sound like it's high energy or low energy? Most people think it sounds quite high energy, quite arousing. Does it sound positive or negative? People often think that it sounds very positive. Actually, the emotion he's trying to express there is triumph, a celebration. Now, what's really interesting here is that he knows what it means to celebrate something. Some emotions are so culturally specific that they don't really have any meaning if you go to another part of the world where people don't share that same cultural background. That's not what we're dealing with here. He knows what it means to celebrate something, to feel great about something, to want to, make a noise. However, the sound he produces is not recognised by people back in London as sounding triumphant, as sounding celebratory. It's not a universally recognised expression of emotion. It's culturally determined. So by no means are all the emotions we studied here showing this pattern of having a similarity across different cultures. But in fact, quite a lot of them did. So this is the paper we studied with we published with Disa. The box here, the red box, that's marking out emotions that have been shown to be cross-culturally recognised from the face. So anger, disgust, fear, sadness, and surprise have been already shown to be cross-culturally recognised from facial expressions of emotion. And here we are finding that the same characteristic. The English recognise the Himba recognise the English. There's some universality here to the recognition of these emotions. If you're in the middle of the Namibian desert and you get vomit on your hand and you go, ugh, that's meaningful to the people around you. So it's not the case that the voice is bad at expressing these. We also had other emotions that hadn't been studied, particularly with the face, and we were interested in positive emotions because we're starting to go out in this direction. So we're asking about triumph, laughter, pleasure, and relief. And of these, there's something funny happening with relief, and I'm very happy to take questions on that. But the only vocal expression that's positive, that is showing some sort of commonality really strongly across these two communities, the English recognise the Himba and vice versa, is laughter. So whether the joyfulness there or the playfulness that's being picked up on, people understand its meaning. You do not need to have familiarity with another culture to understand what's happening when they laugh. Now, another study that we did where laughter started to look a little bit different. Most of the studies I've done have been very, very boring studies of speech perception and speech production. It's not normally as much fun as laughter. And Disa and I were interested in just, I'd done a lot of studies on how the brain processes speech, and we thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to see how the brain processes these non-verbal emotional expressions? So we put people into the scanner and we played them 4 different kinds of emotional expressions, 2 very positive, 2 very negative. So people either heard triumph sounds, laughter sounds, so both very positive. Sorry, can I keep coughing at you? Sorry. Or they heard 2, they also heard 2 different categories of very negative emotional sounds. So disgust sounds, ugh, sounds, and fearful sounds, the sounds of people screaming. So we've got lots of examples of each. And we chose those because they're very positive or very negative, and they're not confused with each other. And when we put people into the scanner, they just listened to those sounds. They weren't having to do anything when they heard them. And what we find is something quite interesting in terms of the brain networks that are recruited. So you may or may not have heard of things called mirror neurons or mirror systems. Those are brain systems that are recruited both when you perceive something in the world and when you do that thing yourself. So the classic example would be seeing somebody, say, peeling an orange would activate parts of the brain that you yourself would activate if you were peeling the orange. And the idea is that maybe you're sort of understanding action by simulating it yourself. We saw this very strongly for the non-verbal expressions of emotion, much more strongly than we ever see it for speech. And that's shown up here in green. And in fact, we included a motor localizer so we could be absolutely certain we were seeing activation that's associated with moving your face into facial expressions and without making a noise. And also when you hear these emotional vocalizations. But really interestingly, we did not find that this orofacial mirror activation, this kind of priming to act, was there for all the emotions. In fact, it was strongly driven by how positive the emotions were and how arousing, how exciting the emotions sounded. What this means in practice is actually we got very little activation in this orofacial mirror system when you hear negative sounds like screams, and just particularly not to discuss sounds like ugh, and a lot more activation for the positive sounds, particularly the laughter. And this was interesting because we've been reading other papers around laughter, and there's an American scientist called Robert Provine who pointed out that one of the characteristics of laughter is that it's highly behaviorally contagious. We can catch a laugh from somebody else. In fact, a lot of the laughter you produce is happening just because somebody else is laughing. And we thought, is that what we're seeing here? Even when people are having their brain scanned, they are primed to join in when they hear laughter, and maybe a bit when they hear triumph sounds, because in the real world, that would be something that normally you would be sharing with other people. Now, there's two things that are really important about behavioral contagion. First of all, well, I should say three things. First of all, it's really common in social animals. So we aren't the only animal that shows behaviorally contagious phenomena. If you look like a lot of a behavior like yawning, we yawn when we're tired, but if somebody else yawns, we will often join in with the yawn. And that's a behavioral contagion. We do it, dogs do it, chimpanzees do it, budgerigars and turtles do it. But social animals seem to do this affiliative behavior. And that's what Provine thinks it is. You're just sort of showing a very basic sort of connection and affiliation with a conspecific when you join in, because you're much more likely to catch a laugh or a yawn from a human you know than a human you don't know. And that's true for the chimpanzees as well. They catch a yawn from a chimpanzee they know, not from a chimpanzee they don't know. In fact, across the board, even for a budgerigar, familiarity is driving it. And the other thing that's really interesting about behavioral contagion is it's something we learn to do. If you look at babies, they don't show any behavioral contagious phenomena. They're something we teach babies to do. So you've got this very interesting, it's very basic, it's very overlearned, but it's social and it is learned. But one of the really interesting things about behavioral contagion is there's a whole world of these things. So coughing can be contagious, scratching can be contagious, yawning can be contagious, but in humans are the only animals that laugh contagiously. So there's something different about the way that we use laughter in the way that we can learn to laugh just because somebody else has laughed. So this is interesting, and it's leading us in this direction of thinking about behavioral contagion. I just want to show you a quick example of behavioral contagion. This is a clip from a television program where two men are broadcasting live. The man on the right hears something that makes him laugh. So he starts to laugh in a very spontaneous way. He has been amused by something. It's setting him off. He's laughing. The man on the left is worried about this. It's going to come across as rude. People are singing religious songs. It's not appropriate to be openly laughing at them. And he looks quite worried. He keeps looking at his colleague with real concern, as you can see in that screen grab there. But he also keeps laughing and smiling. That's just because of the behavioural contagion. He is catching that behavioural contagion, those laughs from his colleague, even though he is worried about what's going on.
We're really trying to get out there in the records, but
he's already trying not to laugh.
Thanks for you right now.
Okay.
I
Worried.
cry in the midnight hour, yeah. You heard my cry. You brought up all of my tears.
Worried.
That's why
Smile.
I'm still loving you, oh Lord, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
That was good. That was excellent. I was excellent. You know,
That's why he's worried.
wrong with you? I certainly did enjoy that. I'm sure he's caught up in the spirit. He's getting the Holy Ghost over here. We want to, he has the spirit. He still loves you. We want to get his address. Get his address, and we want to give you a T-shirt here. Oh! Send him a T-shirt. Right here. Right. More confidence. Enjoy that, Danny, Florida.
Oh, I know it'll be the same. Oh, it broke me up.
So this is really interesting there. We've got two different kind of laughs going on. This man is really laughing very hard at something that happened, and his colleague is trying to manage the situation, but laughter and smiles keep occurring just to that priming, through that contagion. Now, if we zoom out for a bit and think about some of the other things we know scientifically about laughter, one of the things that Robert Provine found is that if you ask people about laughter, ask people what makes you laugh, they will talk about jokes and comedy. We think that what we laugh at is comedy, jokes, and humor. That if you look at people, and this is what Robert Provine took himself out to do, if you look at people, you find it's primarily a social behavior. So you are primed to laugh just because other people are around you. You're 30 times more likely to laugh if there's somebody else with you than if you're on your own. And you'll laugh more if you know those people, and you'll laugh more if you like those people. It still remains rooted in play. So children will laugh to indicate that they're being playful, that they're playing. Adults will laugh to indicate that they are playing, that they are being playful. And people will laugh to indicate that their intentions are playful. So my partner and my son like to pretend to throttle each other whenever I take photographs of them, and that could simply look aggressive, but they're laughing while they do it to indicate that they don't really mean it. Everybody laughs more than they think they do. There are, as I say, not many studies of laughter, but the studies that have compared by asking people how often do you laugh and then looking at how often they laugh finds that everybody's laughing more than they think they do. Everybody underestimates how much they laugh. Interestingly, we've just published a questionnaire tool which you can use to measure people's experiences of laughter. And one of the things we find is that there are 4 factors that sort of just capture people's experiences of laughter: how often people think they laugh, frequency of laughter, how much people like laughter, how people understand the way they use laughter, and how people understand the way other people use laughter. And interestingly, that measure of the frequency of laughter doesn't predict how much people laugh when they're having a conversation, but it does predict how much people laugh when they're on their own. So I think when you ask people how often do they think they laugh, they are more aware of when they laugh on their own, and that seems to be perhaps there's a mismatch. But interestingly, how much people laugh when they're having a conversation with somebody else is predicted by how much people think they like laughter. So people's experience, perhaps how much people engage with laughter and like laughter, actually is something that tells you how often they laugh. It's all modulated by social context. You don't laugh randomly. You don't laugh with just anybody. You laugh more with people you like. You laugh more with people you love. Greg Bryant has shown that if you record people having a conversation and you just exert out the laughter from that conversation and play it to other people, people can tell how close two friends are just by how they laugh together. So it's a very truthful signal how you feel the people that you're with. And along those lines, people will tell you more intimate information about themselves. A study by Robin Dunbar found that if you get people laughing, they will share more intimate information about themselves. And this seems to be perhaps like the inverse of this kind of sense of connection that you can build with laughter. Once you feel closer to people because you've been laughing together, you feel like you can share more information with them. Although, as far as we can see, all human cultures share laughter expressions and can recognize laughter, there are cultural differences in how laughter can actually be used. And one very interesting paper claimed that if you look at the world and different countries in the world and divide them up into countries with different amounts of levels of historic migration, what you find is that parts of the world with high levels of historic migration, like, for example, Western Europe, you find that laughter and smiling, they're both more common, and also people produce them in a less ambiguous way than in parts of the world like, say, China, historically, which has low levels of historic migration. fewer laughs and smiles, more ambiguous laughs and smiles. And the argument that they make is that if you are in an environment that is more multicultural, you cannot necessarily assume, because it's multilingual, that you will always share a language with everybody that you meet. Non-verbal social emotions like laughter and smiling, expressions of emotion, become more important because you can use those to be understood and to get an interaction onto a friendly footing if you can't assume that you share language. People will also use laughter to sort of regulate and manage stressful situations. Sorry, it's summer is suddenly arriving in the UK and I'm getting hay fever, sorry. So this man is laughing to show that he's okay. He's at work taking part in a charity event where he's the boss and he's been covered in yellow paint, and all other things being equal, I'd prefer that this wasn't happening. But he's laughing to show that he's not angry, that he's, going along with the joke. And this is, people will also use laughter in really stressful situations, and they can be an extremely efficient way of dealing with stressful situations. This is an extreme example with Bill Clinton managing a probably gently refreshed but definitely very angry Boris Yeltsin in the 1990s following a summit, and Yeltsin comes out and starts berating the press through a translator for saying that he'd be a disaster. He's saying, look, you'll be the disaster. And it's uncomfortable. He's cross. And what he does is he just watches Yeltsin like a hawk until the first opportunity he gets to find something funny, which is literally when his own name is mentioned. And then he laughs like, that's me, I'm Bill Clinton. And from that point onwards, laughs at everything that Yeltsin says. He's very careful not to look like he's laughing at Yeltsin, but he's basically saying, this guy is hilarious. And a few beats in, Boris Yeltsin starts going, yeah, I am hilarious. And by the end of it, everybody's laughing. And it sometimes gets kind of discussed in oh, look at these idiots getting the giggles. And it's not, it's absolutely deliberate way of managing a situation and dealing with a stressful situation, which I'll come back to using laughter. And all of this kind of means that although we think that laughter is something about jokes and comedy and humor, most laughter lives in conversation because it's a social behavior. It's something that's primed by other people. It's something that's happening when we're with other people. And what humans do when they're with other people is they talk to them. They talk to them in speech, or they have a sign language conversation with them. And that's where laughter lives. That's the natural environment for laughter. And in those conversations, people aren't just, sometimes they are laughing at jokes, but most of the time they're laughing at comments and statements like, I might miss my bus, or I'll have another cup of coffee, because they are using the laughter to indicate that they recognize an illusion, they understand something, they agree with something. In fact, Robert Provine pointed out that at any one point in time, the person who laughs most in the conversation is the person who's talking. They're using the laughter to get other people to show that they remember, they agree, they understand. And what this means in practice is that laughter is never neutral. Laughter, you're always trying to work out why someone's laughing. Maybe they're laughing completely helplessly and they're like the gentleman trying to broadcast to the television. There's something that's absolutely set them off and they cannot stop laughing. Or maybe they're laughing in a conversation and there's a whole kind of hall of mirrors of complexity about somebody might be laughing because they like the person they're talking to. They might be laughing because they want the person they're talking to like them. They might be trying to mask another emotion. People will use laughter to cover up things like fear or anger or disgust or sadness or embarrassment or pain. People might be laughing because they're feeling awkward and they're trying to laugh to deal with the stress. A phenomenal range of meanings that laughter can potentially have. And what we find when we look in people's brains when they listen to laughter is they're always trying to work that out. So we created two different sets of laughs. We either got people laughing absolutely helplessly, and this we just did whatever it took to get people to laugh in a really spontaneous way. So here, listen to this laugh. So that's me laughing spontaneously because I've seen my postdoc listening to something that I know makes her want to laugh, and that's just enough to set me off. And that's a very involuntary vocalization for me. I couldn't sing voluntarily. I couldn't get my voice pitch up that high. And we created a whole set of laughs like that, just doing whatever it took to get people laughing really helplessly. And then we got the same people to laugh in a way, like imagine that we sort of said, imagine your friend's told a joke and you're laughing because you like your friend, but it wasn't really that funny. And these more conversational laughs, they're not evil laughs. They're not people going, ha, or ha, ha, ha. You could hear there, it wasn't an unpleasant laugh, but it was also different. It was shorter, it was lower in pitch, it had a sort of nasality to it. And it looks, you know, people are good at telling the difference between those two different kinds of laughs. And what we did, we took that into the scanner, your brain again, and here we are trying to find if there's a difference in how the brain processes those two kinds of laughs. And there are. And what we find, too, in auditory parts of the brain, when you hear that spontaneous laughter, possibly because you hear sounds that you don't hear in other contexts, think about all those ridiculous laughs at the top of the talk I played from France. And also possibly because they're unambiguous. There's this person is sort of lost in the laughter. There's no confusion here about what's going on. In contrast, we got, in fact, if anything, more activation when people heard those conversational laughs, and that's the activation shown in pink. And this was in parts of the thalamus and also out in medial prefrontal cortex. And actually, these include lots of brain areas associated with mentalizing, thinking about what someone else is thinking. And we think that this is because when you hear somebody clearly producing a laugh intentionally, that laugh isn't helpless. So somebody going, ah, ha, 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 ha. Maybe they're trying to cover up being embarrassed. Maybe they're feeling nervous. Maybe they are trying to laugh so that somebody else doesn't notice that they're actually telling a lie. There's all these different reasons why somebody might be laughing in a way that's not completely helpless. And you're trying to work it out. Even if you're lying in the brain scanner and you are not being told to do anything when you hear the sounds, there's an intentional laugh there, and you're a human who wants to understand what that means. Interestingly, that priming response that we saw to laughter in that first study I showed you, I thought we were going to get a much bigger priming response when people heard the spontaneous laughter, because everybody rates that as a lot more contagious. And in fact, that's not what we found. We got, as you can see here on the right, orofacial mirror activation when people heard any laugh, and it was actually the same for the two different kinds of laughs. What made a difference was across the participants. We got people out of the scanner, and then we gave them the different laughs, and we asked them to categorize them into the two different kinds of laughs. And what we find is that their score on that test correlated with how much they'd shown this priming response to any laughter earlier when we were scanning their brain. So it's not just contagion. If you are primed to join in when you hear laughter, you actually understand the laughter better. And we think that that might be something really interesting. Remembering that that contagion itself is learned, maybe we could actually start to use this as a way of pulling out the things that influence, for example, why people do laugh different amounts in adulthood. What kind of developmental trajectory has led to this? Interestingly, we also found there's some clinical relevance here. So here we have two different groups of boys. One is a normally developing group of teenage boys, and then we have a group of boys who are at risk of psychopathy. So they're high in callous and unemotional traits, and they are also have conduct disorders. So they're badly behaved and they don't care if they hurt somebody. And they rate laughter as less contagious than the normally developing boys. And they also show a reduced effect of this priming when they hear laughter in the scanner. Now, I'm not saying that psychopathy is a problem of laughter, but if you think about how laughter takes you from somebody's emotional world into their social world, as it's an emotion we express when we're with other people, if you can't do that, if you don't join in when other people laugh, if you don't get that sense of closeness and intimacy that other people get when they laugh together, imagine the distance that's giving you. And it's not telling us the direction of causality here. We don't know if these boys have this difference because they've never had the chance to learn it because of the environment they've been in, or if because there's something fundamentally different about them that means they can't. But I think it does suggest that looking at how people use laughter, how people understand laughter, can be something that really can start to pull out some of the social implications of different kinds of developmental issues. And the final point here I just wanted to make is that laughter makes things funnier. So I always take a bit of a body swerve around humor and say I am talking about laughter. But we did a study a couple of years ago where we added laughter onto the ends of jokes, and we just asked people to rate how funny the jokes were. The jokes were really bad jokes, like they're sort of terrible dad jokes. Apologies to all dads. Like, what's the best day for cooking? Friday. And we deliberately chose those because we wanted to try and make them funnier when we put the laughter on. And we also had people, we had it read aloud by a professional comedian who really kind of went for it. And these are the different jokes here. You can see there's a lot of different variety in how funny the jokes are. So that joke's quite funny. That one's definitely not so funny. And the line in red is showing you people's ratings of the jokes when they just hear the joke. And then we took a different group of people and they heard the jokes with laughter edited onto the end. And it was just one of those sounds as one person laughing on their own. It didn't sound like a laugh track. It was just ha, 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 ha. And what you find is that adding any laughter onto the end of the jokes makes the jokes funnier. There's the lines in blue and green. And the more spontaneous the laughter, the green lines, the funnier it makes the joke. So it's like you can't ignore the laughter. It's affecting how you hear the joke itself. And we've recently conducted a brain imaging study that indicates that part of what seems to be going on here, maybe there may be elements of that contagion effect, seems to be influencing how you hear things when laughter is added on. But also we start to get brain areas we never see for laughter, and also we never hear when people just hear words, like the precuneus and these visual areas. So it looks like maybe when you hear something and then there's laughter afterwards, you are trying to work out why that thing was funny. And you're thinking about maybe what it looks like, and you're thinking about memories associated with it, and you're doing more elaborative processing to try and work out, is that funny? How could that thing be funny? So I just want to finish with this quote about laughter being the shortest distance between two people, because I've always really liked that sense of it, you know, reflecting that intimacy, the closeness of laughter. But thinking about laughter and stress, it may be even more important than that. So there's research from Robert Leviton's lab in the US, where he's been doing a longitudinal study of married couples, very heteronormative, but he has been doing it for decades with the same couples. And he gets them into the lab and he stresses them out while they're wired up to a polygraph, and he stresses them out by asking them to think about a problem in their marriage. And you can see people get stressed out, and what he finds is how do they cope with that stress is what he's interested in. And the couples who manage the stress or react to the stress with what he calls positive affect, but he means laughter and smiling, are the couples who are not only get less stressed in the moment, but also stay together for longer and are happier in their marriage. And it's not because laughter is a bit of magic dust that makes everything okay, because it only works if both members of the couple laugh. So there's something about the nature of a relationship where you have a kind of emotional intimacy, where you can find a way of using laughter and smiling as a way of improving your mood. That seems to be where the power is really lying. So it's not that just laughter makes everything better, but actually the laughter is an index of an emotional relationship that can take you in that direction. And I think that's really important. And I think, again, if you think about how that could relate to well-being and health and the value of relationships, I don't think this is limited to romantic relationships. I think what we mean by friendship very often is people with whom we can actually regulate our emotions together using something like laughter to feel better. So we should probably all take laughter more seriously. I think the main thing that we've learned since Charles Darwin's work is that laughter is associated with play. It's a social behavior. And if we think about Darwin thinking about laughter as being an expression of joy, I think probably the main thing we could say is that it's a social joy. It's something that we share with other people. It's something we express when we're with other people. And in fact, when we can find ways of laughing together, we feel better with those other people and we like them more. And it's a virtuous circle of reinforcing the connections we have with people. And it seems to me that's something that's really important, both in terms of thinking about our lives, but also what we should be thinking about as scientists. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this really inspiring presentation. I want to remind our attendees that if they have questions, they can use the Q&A feature on Zoom. And actually, we already have some questions, so I'll go through those first. Our first question is, does the laughter contagion happen also for aging or neurodegenerative brains, people with mild cognitive impairment, or those with dementia?
It's a good question, and we don't know. So I'm putting together a grant application at the moment to try and look at lifespan understanding and use of laughter, and particularly using contagion, because you can measure contagion from, you know, infancy through to old age. Because it is, if laughter is preserved, then it is something that can still be an extremely valuable, you know, sense of closeness that people can share with other people. And interestingly, I haven't talked about this data at all. If you just look at people's understanding of laughter, and here I'm talking about healthy people, but people's ability to kind of discriminate between different kinds of laugh doesn't actually peak until people are in their 30s, their late 30s at that. So laughter, understanding, particularly conversational laughter, seems to be something that you're learning about throughout your entire early adult life. And you can't, probably because you have to learn about it in social interactions, you can't be told about it. You're learning about your laughter and other people's laughter in those interactions. And then from that point onwards, for the healthy elderly or the healthy people, going across this cohort, it doesn't decline. So I think we certainly know that from that snapshot of healthy Londoners, that you're seeing something that we get better at doing into early adult life, and then that stays good. And not all emotions show that. Some emotions, like recognition of fear, tends to get poorer as we get older. So that isn't, that I think there's something very interesting there. And I'm interested in how much that's actually kind of scaffolded by these sorts of social interactions people get to have, the people they get to share laughter with, for example. Again, that's something I want to know more about.
Thank you. Another question is, do you see women have more laughter contagion than men? Or maybe there's a distinction between extroverts and introverts, or somebody who tends to laugh more than somebody who tends to be more serious?
It's certainly the case that, going back to that laughter questionnaire we developed, agreeable extroverts think they laugh a lot. But that doesn't actually predict how much they laugh. They score highly on that frequency measure. In terms of the contagion, there is a suggestion of sex difference. So we find that women, it's not a huge effect, but it's not unusual for females to rate laughter as more contagious than males. It's not massive, but it's there. And we've got enough. We have a data set with like hundreds of people in, so we can start to pull some of these things apart. And a really interesting study from Scandinavia looked at people put into situations where they were either surrounded by people they knew or people they don't know. And both males and females, familiarity rules. So if you're with people you know, you will laugh more than if you're on, and you'll catch laughter more than if you're on your own. So you'll show more contagion. Oh, sorry, not on your own. If you're with people that are strangers to you. If you look at the situation with the strangers, both the males and the females are not catching laughter as often as they would with the people that they're familiar to them. But for the males, they are equally unlikely to catch a laugh from the unfamiliar males and the unfamiliar females. For the females, are more likely to catch a laugh from an unfamiliar male than an unfamiliar female. Given that we know that this is learned behavior, I think that might kind of suggest that females have learnt perhaps a strategy of using laughter contagiously around unfamiliar males, who can be sometimes a little bit of a mixed bunch, as a way of sort of managing the situation. And, we need more studies, we need to replicate it. But I think there are glimpses of this difference in contagion. And I think, bearing in mind that it's learnt, it makes me want to know more about how it gets learned.
Another question is if there's evidence that laughter may slow down aging brains, and have there been any studies where, for example, they would compare Western Europeans to Chinese persons of the same age?
It's very difficult because you can't, if you ask people how often do you laugh, you won't get an accurate answer. So you can quantify brain health and you can quantify age, but it's hard to quantify that how much have you laughed aspect. That being said, we know that the size and the strength of your social networks predicts your physical health, predicts your mental health, and it predicts it predicts how long you'll live. And it's not because that social network is abstract and just like, that there's some sort of total value of numbers of friends you have. Part of it can be that friends will help you with things when there are problems. But I think the other part of it, and probably the more significant part, is those are the people you talk to, and those are the people that you get to share laughter with. So if we know that people get a benefit from talking to each other, it seems to work as, we show the same benefit from conversations as other apes show from physical grooming each other. And you get to, you get a release of endorphins, which is the same with laughter. So if you have conversations and you're laughing in those conversations, you will be doing the things that A, are going to be regulating your mood in a better direction, B, are going to be increasing your physical feeling of well-being because of the endorphins. There will also be reductions in adrenaline and reductions in cortisol. And those are all things that will be making you feel better. They might not make your... There's also, and I'm hesitant to mention this because it is, people go a bit wild. But when you've been laughing, you also get an increase in human growth hormone, which is important when you're growing, but also remains important throughout your whole life because it's involved in the immune system. So given that humans don't laugh randomly, you laugh with those people in your network. I think maybe the implications for healthy aging are, what can we do to help preserve people's social networks, give them environments where they can share conversation and laughter with the people in their social network. One of the problems with getting old is that friends move away, or they're ill, or they die, so how can we give people opportunities to make new nodes in their social network? Take the social side of laughter really seriously, because then you'll get the benefits of laughter more, I think.
Yeah, I think that is such an important insight. We're a lot of our awardees and several of our colleagues are looking at social isolation and loneliness and the detrimental effects it has on aging, and kind of that adds another layer to that, another dimension.
It's like the flip side of it. It's that, that we know that loneliness is terribly bad for you, and the inverse of loneliness is that social contact. So why is the social contact good for you? Well, probably because that means the conversation and laughter.
Yeah. We have a question here from Peter Pressman, who says he's a longtime fan of your work. And regarding the earlier question about cognitive decline, he has a JNNP article published some time ago regarding laughter in degeneration, but has now
brilliant.
AI. And he was wondering if you have any thoughts about, now with the growth of AI, about the use of AI to be integrated in these types of analysis.
Oh, I mean, just it's amazing what the speed with which it's changing how we can do analyses. So first of all, I'm delighted to hear about your paper, and if you wouldn't mind sending me a copy, I'd be really pleased to see that. Thank you. So one of the things that's really interesting about laughter is that you can measure it physically. If you can measure, because people move their chest walls very, very distinctively when they're laughing. And if you can measure that, or measure the physical movements associated with that, you would potentially be able to track somebody's laughter over a day or over a week in a way that doesn't require you to record their speech. People don't like that. It feels invasive. So in a way that's reasonably private, you could track people's laughter, and it would be amazing to sort of combine that across a number of people and their works, and use AI to actually pull out, where people are laughing, who they're laughing with, how that's changing with, for example, if somebody's going in and out of, periods of depression, can you kind of actually pick that up with how they're laughing? Is there any kind of prodromal pattern to that? So I think AI is going to be absolutely central to the kinds of really, large scale studies we're going to have to do to actually look at this in a more naturalistic thing, because I've done a great deal of the work I've done has been lab-based, and Robert Provine pointed out that people don't laugh very much in the lab, and that's true. I found out the hard way. It's hard. We've got hacks for it. We run studies and tell people it's a study on friendship, and actually we're looking at how the friends laugh together. But so there are ways around it, but it's still in a natural situation. And the more we could get it out into how people actually laugh in the real world, when they're with the people they want to laugh, in the places where they want to laugh, that's going to really, really improve the meaningfulness, the ecological validity of what we're measuring.
There is a question about pregnancy. Are there any studies that show if a pregnant woman laughs or laughs a lot, if that has any impact on the child?
Pretty much any question about, is there any effect of X on laughter? The answer is almost always no, because we just are so few studies. I'm not aware of anything, and it would be difficult, because you'd have to design the study, which meant you had some sort of measure of the laughter. But if you think about, and I don't really talk about this because it's not my research, but because when you laugh, you immediately get a decrease in adrenaline, and over a longer time scale, you get a decrease in cortisol. A laughing pregnant woman is going to be more relaxed and less stressed, and we know that there are implications of that on the growing baby. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if there wasn't a route for that.
Another question has to do with culture. How much is culture influencing laughter? And could that also partly explain the migration effect that you mentioned?
Well, laughter, I think it does. so you can have people, you get this tendency with humans, even if we have emotions where we can recognize them in all cultures, it doesn't mean to say they're used in exactly the same way in all cultures. And for example, if you go further east, so Thailand or Japan, or the Philippines, it's not at all unusual for people to react to bad news, really bad news in some cases, with laughter. And you can sort of see that's got its roots in our use of laughter to deal with stressful situations. But it can be, to people from the West, it can seem quite jarring. So I met a British man who'd worked for a bank in the Philippines, and he'd lost a lot of money, and he had to call up his boss and explain that he'd lost a lot of money. And one of his Philippine colleagues said, when you tell him he will laugh, do not assume that means you're okay, because in London it would mean you're fine. Oh, don't worry about that. And it doesn't mean that. It's an acknowledgement of the severity, and that can lead to it can lead to big misunderstandings. But that just got its roots in this kind of different kind of particular use of acknowledgement of the severity, as with its roots perhaps in stress. Cultures also vary in where laughter is considered to be rude. And I've got really interested. So in the UK, well, no, go back to Japan. People in Japan do not laugh as much in the workplace because it's considered to be rude and inappropriate. So the same people in the workplace might not laugh together when they're in work, and then if they go out in the evening, they would be laughing because now we're not at work and it's appropriate. And in the UK, we certainly, and I suspect this would probably apply in the US as well, we get very concerned if people laugh, if defendants laugh when they're in court. If you read newspaper reports where somebody's, a defendant is seen laughing, it's a sign that they don't take it seriously, that they don't care about the victims. This is all trivial to them. They're just having fun, and we take it very badly. It's never thought of as maybe they're nervous, maybe they're trying to not feel as bad about this really bad situation. That's never how we interpret it. So every culture has these points where suddenly the laughter's wrong, and then we will be very judgmental about it because it's gone past the threshold where we think it's appropriate.
The next two questions are kind of similar, so I'll try and merge them. So most people with non-normative cognitive decline still feel emotions, happy and sad at different levels. What does your experience tell you about our opportunity to create positive feelings and laughter in these people? Any thoughts on how we could bring laughter or joy to persons with brains in a state of decline?
It's a very good question. I would probably think both about the social networks and sort of the contact that you might be able to, that's not always easy to do. You also may have come across, there's sort of work certainly in Alzheimer's showing that people's understanding of music is frequently preserved, and that they can kind of react to music in a way that seems that they don't react to other things. And my colleague Kath Loveday has done work looking at sort of like how musical memories do seem to, particularly for music that has emotional meaning to people, you seem to be able to access it differently, and people are incredibly good at recognizing a piece of music that they like from like the tiniest little snippet. And they show when you ask them about the music, it tends to be music that they loved in their teens and their 20s. And we were wondering if the same was true for humor. So we did a study where instead of asking people about the sort of music that they loved, we asked people about the comedy that they loved. And you see this same shape. People talk about comedy from their teens and their 20s, their early adult life. So that might be another way in, if you think, because it's got that kind of emotional meaning to people. It's not just that it's funny, but it's funny from that time. So that this is all still up in the air. We're still doing on the baby steps of studying it. But I think that thinking about what humor would work would be something that people was meaningful to people from that point in their life. That might be something also to look at.
And one last question before we run out of time. Do people react differently to natural laughter than suppose fake one? And are there any cultural differences in that as well?
Well, people are definitely good at telling the difference, and there's individual variation there, but on the whole, adults are pretty good at spotting it. You can tell if somebody's really, really helpless. There are interesting cultural differences, partly because that more kind of intentional communicative laughter, it's under the same kind of neural control as other voluntary vocalizations like speaking. And that means it will be much more likely to be shaped by your culture. And Disa Sota has found, I was a co-author, but it was her study, that people can tell if people are in group or out group from different cultures based on how they laugh. So that kind of, that there are definitely cues there that you're using to work out if somebody's, kind of part of your community or not. And I'm interested in how does that develop? What's the sort of the trajectory of the development of that use of laughter? So I suspect that for babies, it's all spontaneous. For toddlers, it's all spontaneous. They're never laughing because they're polite. They're laughing because something's absolutely delighting them. And then at some point, you learn to use that laughter, start to use laughter in this more social way. And as I said, this is something you then continue to do for a couple of decades. But at that point, you do start to get that understanding that laughter can be used, and has maybe to laugh at people, or that it starts to get this more complex life. It's not just laughing through sheer delight. So, and understanding that, I think, is going to take us a while. But it's yeah. So but it was also, of course, giving you a very clear route for social and cultural factors to start influencing that growth. You're muted.
So sorry about that. I was but this has generated a lot of discussion. So I know we have more questions, but unfortunately we're running out of time. So maybe people with more questions can contact you directly, if that's okay.
Please do send me an email. Yeah.
So I want to thank you again so much for this wonderful presentation, as well as all our attendees. Remind you that our next webinar is Wednesday, June 12th, with Dr. Fei Wang from Cornell University, talking about disentangling clinical complexity of heterogeneous diseases with large EHR data. I remind you also that the recording of all our webinar sessions will be made available on our YouTube channel. And again, thank you all, and especially thank you, Professor Scott.
Thank you. Thanks for the great questions. Thank you very much.